There are certain people walking this earth who were born to carry a weight that never quite made sense. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you felt like you were born between two worlds, never fully belonging to the light, yet never collapsing into the dark. You've walked through life feeling everything more deeply than others, sensing energies in rooms that others are blind to, carrying burdens that were never yours, yet somehow became your responsibility. And at some point you probably asked yourself, why me? Why does it feel like I'm constantly torn between realms I can't even prove exist? But what if I told you that this sensation, this pull between light and shadow, isn't a flaw, it's a sign? A sign that you weren't just born for a normal life. You were chosen to be a bridge, a sacred living connection between the celestial and the infernal, between angels and demons. Not because you are meant to be torn apart, but because you are meant to unify, to understand both sides, to walk in both realms, to hold the tension of opposites within one's soul, and not only survive it, but transcend it. Being chosen as the bridge is not a reward. It's a responsibility. It's a spiritual initiation that happens in silence, often in suffering. You won't have an angel show up to explain it to you. You'll just wake up one day and realize that the things that break others don't break you. They open you. You'll see that you've spent your life being misunderstood, not because you're wrong, but because your energy is too rare to be easily categorized. You're built for thresholds. You're built for war zones of the soul. And the first battlefield is always within. Have you noticed how you attract extremes? You meet the most beautiful, light-filled souls, and at the same time the most broken, chaotic, tormented ones seem to gravitate toward you too. There's a reason for that. You are a mirror, a portal. You carry a frequency that resonates with both heaven and hell. Angels recognize your compassion, your surrender, your alignment with divine order. Demons recognize your resilience, your shadow work, your refusal to collapse under pressure. You are known in both realms, and that's rare. That's why your life has never been ordinary. But it's not enough to be aware of this. You have to own it. You have to stop judging yourself for not fitting in. Stop trying to numb your senses just to feel normal. You're not here to be normal. You're here to be awake. You're here to walk into spiritual chaos and bring order. You're here to speak to both angels and demons and not be consumed by either. Because you don't belong to one side. You belong to the space between them. The sacred in-between where transformation happens. Let me ask you something deep. What if everything you thought disqualified you was actually proof of your assignment? What if your depression, your anxiety, your spiritual sensitivity, your isolation, what if all of that wasn't weakness, but the molding of a vessel strong enough to hold divine paradox? What if the very reason you've suffered so much is because you're one of the few who can handle the weight of both heaven's light and hell's fire and not lose yourself? You've probably had moments, maybe even recently, where you felt like you were going to break, like you were carrying something ancient.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Something cosmic, and no one around you could see it. You've probably been the one people come to for healing, for guidance, for love, even while you yourself are bleeding inside. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. That's a sign. Those who are bridges often feel invisible to the world, but hyper-visible to the spiritual realm. You're tested more. You're attacked more. But you're also anointed more. The first sign God made you the bridge is that you've always felt like you're in the middle of a spiritual tug-of-war. One voice pulling you toward your highest self, whispering of peace, purpose, and divine love. Another voice tempting you to self-destruct, to sabotage, to believe you're unworthy. Most people only hear one side clearly. But you hear both. You live in the tension. And that's not dysfunction. It's design. Because to mediate between angels and demons, you have to understand both their languages. You have to walk through the fire without becoming ash. You have to look into the void without forgetting your light. And here's what most people don't realize. Demons don't chase the weak. They chase the dangerous. They chase those who carry enough light to disrupt their agendas. If your life has been a spiritual battlefield, it's not because you're cursed. It's because you're called. You're seen as a threat to darkness because you carry a frequency that can pierce illusion, that can anchor heaven into hellish places. And that's why you feel the weight. That's why your emotions are intense. That's why your dreams are vivid. That's why you can walk into a room and feel everything that no one else is saying. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're spiritually awake. And with that awakening comes clarity, but also responsibility. You can't afford to numb out anymore. You can't afford to pretend you're like everyone else, because you're not. You're a conduit, a messenger, a soul stationed at the crossroads of realms. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner your life will start to make sense. The sooner your pain will reveal its purpose. So I ask you this, what if God didn't place you in the middle just to suffer, but to transform suffering into healing energy for others? What if your agony was actually alchemy in disguise? What if every time you've been pulled down into the dark it was training, not punishment? Because one day someone else will be in that same darkness, and you'll be their bridge out. There are moments in life when the fire doesn't just brush against you, it consumes everything. Your plans, your peace, your relationships, your identity. And while others are confused by your collapse, you know deep down that it's not random. It's a spiritual burning, a sacred undoing. If you've ever felt like you've been through more than your fair share of trials, if life seems to test you again just when you thought you were healing, that's because you're not being broken, you're being branded, marked by fire, chosen by spirit. You're being carved into something holy, something necessary for a world that doesn't yet understand the weight of spiritual bridges like you. One of the clearest signs that God made you the bridge between angels and demons is this: your suffering has never been ordinary. It's never been just a breakup, just an illness, just a failure. It always has layers. It always hits deeper than it should. You grieve heavier. You feel the betrayal more viscerally. You lie awake not just thinking about what happened, but what it means. That's because your soul is not just experiencing pain, it's translating it, processing it for others, transmuting it into something that will one day become light for someone still trapped in the dark. Think about the times you've been through something and had no one around you who could understand. You didn't just feel isolated, you felt otherworldly. Like something ancient was being stirred within you, like you were being spiritually initiated in silence. That's because your pain isn't just personal, it's archetypal. You are walking the path of the mystic, the wounded healer, the one who descends into chaos not to be destroyed by it, but to map the way out for others. That's what a bridge does, it stands in the gap. It connects what seems unconnectable. And that's why your trials have felt like sacred storms. They were never meant to end you. They were meant to awaken you. Have you ever noticed how people open up to you without knowing why? They confess things to you they've never told anyone. They cry in your presence. They sense the depth in your energy even if they can't articulate it. That's not your imagination. That's your field. That's your spiritual signature. You've been through fires that burned the ego off of you. You've been purified by pain. And even when you didn't realize it, you were becoming safe space. You were becoming a sanctuary. That's what happens to bridges. They stop being just a person and start becoming a passage. But here's the part no one talks about: the loneliness. The deep, aching solitude that often comes with being spiritually chosen. Because when you walk between worlds, you don't fully belong to either. You're too awake for the asleep, too raw for the numb, too intense for the surface level. And so you wander, you become a spiritual nomad. You might even start to doubt the path, wondering if you're cursed instead of chosen. But listen closely. The loneliness is not a punishment, it's a purification. It's where you learn to walk with spirit. It's where your ego dies and your soul rises. It's where you stop performing and start listening. I want to ask you something deep. What has your pain been training you to carry? Because there's something sacred about the way you survived. You didn't just push through, you integrated. You didn't just move on, you transformed. And maybe no one saw the work you did in the dark, but the universe did. Spirit did. And now, you're being called to stop hiding your scars. You're being called to embody your wounds, not as shame, but as sacred credentials. Because the world doesn't need more masked perfection, it needs more embodied truth. As the bridge, you learn to see suffering through a spiritual lens. You start recognizing that the people who trigger you the most are actually mirrors showing you your own shadows. That the demons you face in others are often reflections of the ones you've already conquered within yourself. You stop demonizing the dark and start understanding it. You stop idolizing the light and start living it. You realize that God didn't place you in the middle because He couldn't decide where you belong. He placed you there because you belong everywhere and nowhere at once. You are the balance, the link, the guide. And that's why your life has required so much fire, because no one becomes a bridge without first being broken open, without first being emptied out of illusion so that truth can take root, without being forced to feel everything so that one day, when someone else stands at the edge of their abyss, you can look them in the eye and say, "I've been there, and there's a way through." There is a rare kind of person who walks through darkness and doesn't come out afraid but enlightened. Someone who doesn't just survive the night but learns to speak its language. If you're still here, still breathing after everything that's tried to break you, then you might be one of them. You might be someone who has stood in the presence of your own demons, not to worship them or give in, but to understand them. That doesn't mean you're dark. It means you're deep. It means you've been entrusted with the knowledge that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. And that is no small thing. That is a divine responsibility. You see, when God chooses someone to be the bridge between angels and demons, He doesn't just give them light, He gives them eyes for the dark. You start to see patterns others miss. You feel the pain behind people's smiles. You sense the silent war behind someone's laughter. And instead of running from it, you lean in. You don't judge it, you translate it. You ask, what trauma is this behavior trying to protect? What wound is this anger defending? What lie is this mask hiding? That's the language of shadows. And you know it fluently, not because you studied it, but because you lived it. This is one of the clearest signs that you are the bridge. Darkness doesn't seduce you, it speaks to you. Not to pull you in, but to be seen, to be heard, to be healed. You've been given a spiritual decoder ring for human suffering. And because of that, people come to you with their chaos. They come to you with their addictions, their panic, their shame. Not because you have all the answers, but because your energy tells the truth without needing to say a word. I've touched the void too, and I didn't run from it. I made peace with it. That's why you don't flinch when someone tells you their worst story. That's why you don't turn away when someone shows you their shadow. Because you remember what it was like to beg for light and not know if it would ever come. You remember when your own mind was a battlefield. You remember screaming into the silence, wondering if God could hear you. And because you remember, you don't judge, you hold, you witness. You translate. But here's the paradox. The more you understand the dark, the more light you generate. Because you're no longer afraid of what's hiding in the corners of the soul. You've been there. You've sat with your inner demons and asked them what they needed. And when you did that, you broke a pattern. You healed something ancestral. You opened a door for others to do the same. So don't underestimate the power of your shadow work. Every time you faced your pain, instead of numbing it, you taught your spirit how to lead. You became the kind of person who can walk into someone else's chaos and not drown in it. That's not ordinary. That's holy. Let me ask you a question only your soul can answer. What if the darkness you survived was never meant to destroy you, but to prepare you to guide others through theirs? What if your empathy is not a weakness, but a sacred tool? What if your sensitivity is not a flaw, but a divine radar? What if your ability to see the pain in others is not by accident, but by assignment? You didn't become this version of yourself by skipping steps. You earned your wisdom in the fire and the fog. You bled for your clarity. And now when you speak, people listen not because your voice is loud, but because your presence is real. It carries weight. It carries truth. That's what happens when you've survived your shadows. You become a living testimony. You don't need to prove your worth. You embody it. And the world needs you now more than ever, because it's full of people who are drowning in their own darkness, afraid to admit it, afraid to face it. They need someone who's been there, someone who can walk beside them without fear, someone who doesn't just quote the light but knows the path to it, step by step, breath by breath. That someone is you. You are not here to curse the darkness. You're here to illuminate it from the inside out. You're not here to pretend it doesn't exist. You're here to remind others that even in their darkest hour, they are not alone. You're here to show them that the shadow is not their enemy, it's their unintegrated self, waiting to be seen, loved, and brought home. This is what it means to be the bridge. You walk between angels and demons not because you're confused, but because you're clear. Because you understand that both realms are part of the human experience, and your role is not to pick a side, but to hold the middle, to create space for healing, to speak the language of shadows with the heart of light. What if I told you that your entire life has been a preparation for something you couldn't yet name? That every betrayal, every spiritual battle, every silent scream into the night was not a detour, but a divine initiation. You see, some souls weren't born to escape the world. They were born to enter it fully, its beauty, its chaos, its contradictions, and bring heaven into the places most have abandoned. That's you. You are not made to float above the fire. You are made to stand inside it and become the calm. You are born to anchor heaven in hell. This is the final and perhaps the clearest sign that God made you the bridge between angels and demons. You've been placed in impossible situations not to be consumed but to transform them. You've walked into rooms heavy with tension and watched the energy shift just because you were there. You've entered relationships that nearly broke you only to emerge with deeper compassion. You've carried light into places where no one was praying for it, where no one believed it could still reach. And you did it not because you're perfect, but because something greater moves through you. Bridges are not comfortable. They are not glamorous. They are not always thanked. But they are necessary. They endure pressure from both sides. They are walked on, leaned on, and yet they hold. That's your spirit. That's your essence. You've held when others collapsed. You've stayed when others ran. And you've loved when it made no sense to keep loving. That's not weakness. That's divine architecture. That's the structure of a soul designed to carry collective healing. You weren't made for escape. You were made for impact. That's why the darkness couldn't keep you. That's why the pain didn't win. Because God knew the world would need someone who could walk through hell and still remember heaven. Someone who could sit with the suicidal and remind them they're sacred. Someone who could feel the rage of the broken and still see their light. Someone who doesn't run from the mess, but leans into it with open hands and says, "We can heal this together." Let me ask you something that only a bridge soul can fully grasp. What if your purpose isn't to avoid shadowy spaces, but to enter them with such grounded light that the shadows start to recognize their own divinity? What if your presence alone recalibrates the room, not because you preach, but because you embody what others have forgotten? That they are not alone and never were. This is the rarest kind of power. Not domination, not control, but resonance. You become a tuning fork for truth. Your energy calls the lost parts of people back to themselves. You don't even need to say much. Your eyes carry the weight of someone who has died and come back not physically but spiritually. And that resurrection energy is contagious. It awakens others. It reminds them, you were born to be human and holy at the same time. Not to pretend you're above the world, but to bless it from within. to touch the filth and find the sacred, to sit in grief and still birth joy, to walk through spiritual war zones and plant seeds of peace. That's why you don't fit in with shallow narratives. That's why surface-level conversations feel like static to your soul. You are wired for depth, for truth, for transcendence, not by leaving the world, but by transforming it. So when you feel overwhelmed, remember this: you were never meant to carry this alone. You're not the source, you're the vessel. You're not the light, you're the lamp, and the power flowing through you. That's divine. That's ancient. That's the voice of all who've walked this path before, whispering, keep going. You're not crazy. You're chosen. And now it's time to stop hiding that. It's time to stop dimming to make others comfortable. It's time to rise as the bridge you were born to be. Not with arrogance, but with authority. Not with fear, but with fire. Because the world is full of people stuck between their demons and their angels, drowning in confusion, praying for someone to show them the way. And when they look up, they will see you, not as their savior, but as their reflection, as proof that healing is possible, that light can live in dark places, that heaven can be anchored in hell. You are the bridge, and you are ready.